Hi, my name is Donna Hayes, and welcome to this episode of Inspired Purpose, where inspiration fuels purpose. It's April, and also Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And today, my guest is Mr. Bremen Dahan, who is a confidential sexual violence advocate coordinator. We're going to talk to Bremen today about this very sensitive subject of sexual assault, especially in the wake of the Me Too movement and its national attention. Welcome, Bremen. So Bremen, thank you for joining me today. I appreciate you being here and taking out the time to do this interview.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.
So you, sir, have a very impressive resume. Educated and you received your Bachelor of International Studies from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, Master of International Relations, Peace and Conflict Resolution, Academic Fellow from the University of Queensland in Brisbane, Australia.
Yes.
And you also have a Master of International Business Administration Strategy Focus from Rotterdam School of Management, Erasmus University in the Netherlands. Wow. Okay. You are a nonprofit management professional who has managed your own nonprofit and managed others. You have a track record, I see, of developing organizational strategy, trainings, and tracking its implementation. You have over 7 years of international and national nonprofit experience, worked across this globe, New York, Panama, China, and even co-authored a United Nations book chapter on physiological effects of Ebola virus on Liberian youth. What a notable list of accomplishments, which I'm sure I don't even have them all here. And I am certain that you are still yet making some big waves in this world, which is great. The reason why I invited you on the show today was to discuss with you a very sensitive subject, sexual assault and violence. Let me just say that April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and that is why I wanted to have you on this month so that we can bring shine a light on this subject that isn't necessarily out of the news, right? Because we know that it's received national attention, especially in the wake of the Me Too movement. And our dear sister who brought that term to fruition back in 2006, right? Miss Tanara, I want to make sure I pronounce her name correctly. Is it Tanara Burke?
I believe so.
Who is the one who initially had that hashtag Me Too. And of course, with the infamous Harvey Weinstein case and all of the Jeffrey Epsteins and all of the stuff that we hear about in the news, this has really been a national subject. But I have to be honest, I have always really honestly associated domestic violence and sexual assault violence as being sort of one and the same. I know that in October we don't celebrate, but we recognize domestic violence awareness. And I really thought in my ignorance that was all kind of coupled together. I didn't know until after meeting you and preparing for our interview today that there was a Sexual Assault Awareness Month.
Right.
So tell me if I'm correct in my understanding that there is and can be a difference between the two, whereas domestic violence can intersect with sexual assault and violence, right? But
Right.
Sexual assault violence is not exclusive to domestic violence. Do I have that right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So you see more domestic violence, you can think of it in a rudimentary scale as anything non-sexual. So this could be anything from physical violence to financial financial violence, or not allowing somebody to have access to financials. This can be anything from not allowing somebody to see the kids. So this can all be in the realm of domestic, but then you have sexual violence, which, yeah, at the end of the day is rape, sexual assault, groping, indecent contact, anything revolving around the actual contact to the person themselves.
Okay, I got that. So how long has Sexual Assault Awareness Month kind of been, April, like happened? Like when did that start? When did we pick up that month to, do you know?
I don't know offhand, but as long as I can remember, even from my time in university, that's something that we celebrated as well. And I think now, you mentioned that with Harvey Weinstein and the Me Too movement, it's coming more into the forefront. But additionally, even with COVID and having a lot of lockdowns, we're starting to see a rise in domestic violence as well as sexual violence, be that for older adults or also be that for young adults as well. I know here in New Jersey, we're starting to see a rise in the number of youth being unfortunately assaulted, whether that's domestic assault or sexual assault, just due to ongoing stress of the parents or the guardian, plus the child always being home and financial stress and all of that kind of culminating into what we're seeing now.
So I did read somewhere that that was the case in terms of the stresses of the pandemic and having to be quarantined, locked down, whatever the cases are, that persons are experiencing more domestic violence in the home. And that was disheartening to me, especially because I also noticed that the rise in divorces have gone up too. But there are so many cases we don't know about, right? Because people don't or are not so quick to report these cases for fear of retribution in some way, for fear of them threatening the life of another loved one. You know, just for women, I've often heard for being not believed.
Right.
That this thing has happened. So in my research and looking at the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence website, they were talking that, you know, about the percentages, especially in our state, in New Jersey, how they have increased over this time. But let me ask you a question before we delve like into the heart of the matter. I do want to find out from you, your resume, I mean, very impressive. But I want to know, how did you get into this line of work? So why don't you tell us a little bit about you and then tell us sort of how you segued into this line of work?
Yeah, good question. So a lot of my work has always been in the nonprofit field, whether that is through social impact I was doing when I had the opportunity to work in Costa Rica. That was kind of my introduction to it on a professional level. I did a lot as a child, but that's more or less through my parents or through other local organizations. When I did go to university in Costa Rica for a while, I was put in charge of helping young kids prepare for the entrance exams in English. I fortunately speak Spanish, so I was able to help them prepare in English. And that was kind of my step into kind of leading a group of kids in a nonprofit sense to get to a goal. And I kind of really enjoyed that. And that was kind of the step forward. I then moved into working in Panama with the embassy for a while with the Peace Corps, and then started my own nonprofit in Atlantic City in South Jersey. Right. So that was kind of very much my baptism by fire, if you will, into the nonprofit space. And then just seeing a lot of the issues that were happening, a lot of especially in the underserved communities, for the African American Black communities and also the Spanish speaking communities, we are very much underserved a lot of times. So I was able to see an opportunity through DASAC, and a lot of the opportunities that they had revolved around serving underserved populations. They needed someone who spoke Spanish as well, and I kind of filled in a lot of those gaps. So yeah, it just kind of worked out, and it's something that I'm passionate about, something that I have experience doing in terms of coordinating for nonprofits, also working with communities, the Black communities as well as Spanish speaking communities, and all communities for that matter, and helping them achieve a goal and work towards work towards a little bit more presence in the field that they are underrepresented in. In this case, it would be sexual assault and domestic violence, and having their stories and having accessibility increased so they're able to receive the services that they require.
Got you. So as you're in your role, in your current position, you work as the confidential, which I thought was interesting as a part of your title, right? The confidential sexual violence advocate coordinator. So
Correct.
in that role, tell me what your duties are, and especially, I'm curious to find out about the confidential part of that.
Right. So the duties kind of fall into three categories. The first is working with volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
So we do a lot with training volunteers to be advocates themselves, whether that's going to hospitals or that's advocating for people in the community through different or fundraisers that we do. Right now through COVID, that's a bit put on hold because they don't want anybody going into the hospitals that aren't, let's say, professionals. And even for us, a lot of times we can't go in due to COVID. So a lot of work we're doing right now is over the phone, where we talk to the survivors. So that kind of moves into the second point. We work a lot with the survivors. So we're basically the first folks who go into the hospitals and meet with the survivors after they checked in for being assaulted, sexually assaulted, specifically in my role. And we let them know what their options are. We let them know what their rights are. We let them know about the process that's going to be happening from start right now as they're in the hospital to working with the nurses, to working with the police if that's their decision, to going to the court if that's their decision, and how they can possibly press charges if they want. So we're basically the liaison between the person who's been sexually assaulted and their end goal. Let's say, how can we help them achieve their end goal? That could be not revolving around police, not revolving around the legal system, but they might just want counseling. So we help facilitate that counseling as well. So we're very much the liaison and very much have to understand how the systems work in the state. And the third, we go on to liaisoning with other organizations. So a lot of what I do, as I mentioned before, is helping to facilitate underrepresented communities. So a lot of what I do is I reach into a lot of the churches in the area, especially the African American churches in the area, the African American Chamber of Commerce, as well as the Spanish-speaking community, and try to let them know that our services are here. If they're ever victims, a lot of them, obviously, as all groups are victims of sexual assault, what we can do to help and what resources are available. So those are kind of the three buckets that we work with as the CCSVA.
Okay. So you reach out to churches, you give them your information, sort of like, okay, so if you have a case, refer them to us, and then we can handle the situation as confidentially and as, of course, compassionately as we know how, we've been trained to do. Right. So let me ask a question, because it's disheartening for me to hear that people have to endure this type of pain and abuse. But the numbers are like staggering, how like 1 out of every 3 or 1 out of every 5 women will be, raped or sexually assaulted in their life. And it's just like, okay, I grapple with trying to understand that from the perspective of how are people so, just ugly in their behavior, right? What does that stem from? And I was doing some additional research, and I saw on the CDC website that they're saying sexual assault and violence can be prevented. So do you agree with that? And if so, tell me how you see that being so.
Yeah, so that's a big question. So just to tap onto the back of what you said in terms of 1 to 5, to add on a little bit more towards the harshness of sexual assault, for those who look to press charges and go through that entire process, only about 3% of those cases are actually meet the end where the person is charged with sexual assault. So just to add a little bit more gravity to how this is happening. A lot of what we do is in DaySec is also trying to work through preventative measures. And one of the things that we do is what we call healthy masculinity. We're working on the title, but for now, that's the title that we have. And we very much want to speak with not only youth, but also adults in terms of asking them and reanalyzing what it is to be a man, what is manliness.
Right.
That's something that we move through because we see that a lot of the challenges that we see right now is this a misunderstanding or societal norms of what it is to be a man. And these norms can very much lead to increased sexual assaults, increased domestic violence. As we continue to see, or speaking for a man, you see you being a man as kind of the dominating figure in a relation, in a heterosexual relationship.
Uh-huh.
So what we do is very much try to work, whether that's with adults or with the youth as well, on understanding emotions and what those feelings are. We very much sometimes move into a realm as men of you're either angry or you're funny. That's kind of a joke we make within our group. And those are mainly a lot of the two emotions that we have. Either I'm pissed off or I can make jokes. We don't touch on the other emotions and put names on them for you to understand. In addition to that, a lot of these emotions come with the fear of vulnerability. And that's another thing that we try to touch on as well. What's vulnerability and why are we afraid to be vulnerable? And boiling it down, it's a lot of social norms. So a lot of what we do in the healthy masculinity is try to boil this down to say, are you like this? Are you a quote unquote man because of societal norms?
Right.
And a lot of times, 9 out of 10 times, that's what it is. And that's what we try to work through and facilitate with these groups to challenge some of these notions that we have about what it is to be a man.
So when you talk about this, because I was going to eventually mention that, but since you got me there a little sooner, and that's fine. With this particular group, though, you sort of have a targeted group of young men that you want to deal with, right? Athletes, are they just all high school children, young men, or college? Like, how does that targeted group come together?
Right. So it's through a lot of different areas. We work with, had a presentation about a month ago with a group of recovering substance abuse users.
Uh-huh.
So it goes all the way from a group of substance abuse users all the way to high school athletics.
Gotcha.
So we try to run the gamut because we can't try to assess a group of older gentlemen without assessing those who will be older gentlemen, those being the young kids. So we try to run the gamut to fill in these gaps and address issues that, without us, possibly these wouldn't be addressed.
So I have a question, but I also want to preface my question first by saying, and I want to expand on that a little bit too, is that we don't want to, we're not in the business of male bashing, right? So we're not saying that all men and only men are sexual abusers, right? We know that men get sexually abused and as well, right? And I'm curious to find out what you all address as it pertains to men being sexually abused. How does that happen? How does that work? But the other part of the question was going to be also with the group you're talking about. Do you find that they have had exposure? Have the parents, the persons who they are living with, their guardians, the male figures in their life, have they been, violators of this? And so then they thereby, emulate that which they see.
Right. So for the second part, I'll say mostly those coming from violent relationships end up having or being in a violent relationship. So that's a trend that we see as well. So that's the need to very much address in counseling, especially with young folks, how to move from seeing this as a norm towards seeing a healthy, equitable relationship as a norm. But that's not always the case. Obviously, it has to start somewhere, and a lot of times, just through what we see in society, through music videos, through propaganda, through commercials, we always see men as kind of the dominating figure, and women, unfortunately, as more submissive or as they have their particular role within society, and that role is usually at a lesser, let's say, a lesser level of importance than the man. So trying to kind of take these two, those who have been abused, and go into relationships thinking maybe this is the norm or seeing this as a norm, and those who haven't been abused but are internalizing a lot of the social norms that we have. So trying to address those two groups is kind of how we see ourselves moving forward in the future through a more healthy view of an equitable relationship.
Got you. So that part of the organization, that part of the task force that we're talking about, that group sort of just kind of came into fruition, like not that many years ago, like 2018, correct?
Correct.
So how has it been? How has it been trending? Have you had much success with it? I know COVID has put a damper on a lot of our, goals and aspirations and our abilities to sort of, meet people where they are physically, right? But tell me how you have tried to, or the organization has tried to compensate for the lack of being able to physically, be there with people like you normally would.
Right. So what we've been doing a lot of times now is working through Zoom like everyone else. We've been trying to make sure that we can get groups of people together the same way we would do if it was in person. Sometimes that works out better because we're able to meet people where they are in terms of location wise. And sometimes it's a bit worse because Zoom for some seems maybe a bit unofficial.
Right.
So that's something that we're battling with at the moment. What up till now, it's been quite successful relative to everything that's going on with COVID. The issue that we're seeing now is working more with students. Outside groups seem to be doing well in terms of more adult groups, but to cut into time within schools and getting that permission taken care of with Zoom, that seems to be the more difficult issue that we face.
So the young lady that I referenced earlier who started the hashtag Me Too phrase, right, back in 2006 was Tarana Burke. And she did that to raise awareness to women who had been abused. But it took 11 years, 11 years for that to receive the global recognition. And that was only after the viral tweet that Alyssa Milano sent out when she was talking about the Harvey Weinstein incident. But Tarana Burke gives this quote. She says, "What we need to be talking about is the everyday woman, man, trans person, child, and disabled person. All the people who are not rich, white, and famous, who deal with sexual violence on everyday basis." She says, we need to talk about the systems that are still in place that allow that to happen, end quote. And I wanted to bring that up because you really hit me hard when you said that like only 3% of the cases actually get, end up with someone being convicted of their crime. So what do you think? Do you agree with her? Do you think that this is a system issue in terms of, race and your wealth? What do you believe?
So starting off, we see from the research and the numbers that domestic violence and sexual assault doesn't affect one group more than the other. It's present in all demographics, whether you're rich or poor, regardless of race or ethnicity. Sexual assault and domestic violence happens everywhere. The difference is who reports it, who has access to resources, and that's kind of the gap that we try to fill. A lot of those who would need our services may not be the most wealthy, so we try to bridge that gap between poverty or those who might not have access, or those who don't know the system well. They may have all the resources, but they might not know this system as well as we do. Okay. So we try to always be that liaison for them. And this is an issue of societal norms. I mean, you see, for example, from trans or Black trans women, in terms of demographics, they're the most assaulted, most sexually assaulted demographic in the U.S. So this has a lot to do with our norms. This has a lot to do with what's acceptable in society. And even with that harsh number on the news, we rarely ever see news about that.
Right.
And so a lot of this has to do with what is normal and what is normalized and what's acceptable. And that's something we have to battle with as well.
So how do we battle that? I mean, the work you all are doing is admirable. I didn't know about it until recently, and only because of a mutual friend that introduced us, right?
Right.
And that's how I found out, wow, this is like fantastic. This needs to be put out here. People need to know that you all exist. How else do you sort of sound the alarm, if you will, for those who are in need of the services that you offer?
Right. So what we do a lot is just do a lot of community outreach. We're located specifically in Northwest New Jersey at the moment. So we do a lot of outreach within Northwest New Jersey, but also spreading the word like we're doing now on more of a statewide level on that resources like ours are available. And there's no need to kind of suffer in silence. So what a lot of times we do, we go to schools, we might team up with, for example, a church in the area we teamed up with to go to the food pantry and just stand outside and chat with folks and let them know that we're here.
Okay.
We have a large Spanish-speaking population in the area as well who don't know about our services. So I go to a lot of events and just speak with them and let them know that we're here. And a lot of them, they themselves may not be a victim of sexual assault or domestic violence, but they may know someone. And so every once in a while, I'll receive a call, I'll receive an email, or our hotline will receive an email from someone who knows someone who only speaks Spanish, and they got to know the services through us.
Gotcha.
So this is such an intimate issue that it's very difficult at times to make this grand thing about calling us, opposed to we seeing a better result in going in person to person, letting them know what we do, letting them know our services are confidential. And these are the services that we can offer to try to facilitate a move out of a dangerous situation.
So sexual assaults. So let's sort of outline this and let's have some clarity attached to it. Sexual assault, sexual violence, sex trafficking, all of these things, how do they intersect? Like, what's the thing besides, I won't say besides, what is the thing that makes them the same, maybe, I guess, or is it different? Like, I know because another big thing down, especially in South Central New Jersey, is this sex trafficking thing. I mean, I know it's big across the globe, but there's an area in that part of the state that is heavily trafficked, and young women are heavily trafficked in that area. And it just really is a sore spot for our state, because I don't know why they can't seem to have get a hold on it. We tend to have, I know my church in particular has done campaigns and trying to rally around as many resources as we possibly can in order to sort of try to stop that from happening in that area. So tell me about how they all kind of come together or separate, so that I have an understanding.
You see, sexual assault is kind of the overarching, let's say, umbrella that all of whether it's sex trafficking or sexual violence, all come within the umbrella of sexual assault. You can think of it like that. So sex trafficking is trafficking someone with the purpose of sex. This is different than human trafficking, which is, it might be for labor, most likely for labor. You can see them in the field, you can maybe see them in the nail salon, braiding hair. Right. That's not based on a sexual activity. Sex trafficking is specifically for the uses of sex.
Okay.
Whether that can be, there's no gender, there's no race behind it. We went to a conference, I believe last year, a few months ago, July or June of last year. And right now in the Northeast, where we live, young African American women are the most trafficked in the state.
Oh gosh.
So it's very much pertaining to your demographic of where you live. If you go out west, that demographic may be a bit different. If you go down south, that demographic may be a bit different as well. So sexual trafficking is very much contingent on where you are, but it's more or less the umbrella, and everything happens under the umbrella of sexual assault.
So, tell me what in your experience with talking to those who are, let me first say, to those who are the abusers, right?
Okay.
What generally is their story? Besides, I mean, I know we talked a little bit about, if they witness it, then they sort of, perpetuate it as well, right? They fall into that same trap. But what else? Like, what are the other things that you might notice that have caused them? Is it mental illness? Is that a thing that we're dealing with too when we talk about this from a abuser's lens?
Yeah, so I don't know much about the abuser's lens because my focus is mainly on the victims. But what I do know is that a lot of it is either through norms, a lot of it is through this is how I grew up, this is what's normal. But it seems to be a larger push right now to very much understand and address the abuser's issues and how we can try to change that to being a positive force in our fight against sexual assault and domestic violence.
Right. So then from the abuser, the abused person who comes to you and says something, I think some of the stories I've heard, which really kind of get me at my core, is when I hear, my mom's boyfriend or, a friend of the family or the parent seemingly, allegedly took the side of the abuser over their child. Do you hear that often? Or what are some of the other things that you hear from the abused that they seem to believe, to even like it was my fault? I know that I've heard that as well, which is so sad to me.
Right. There is a lot of self-blaming. There was a lot of, I don't want to destroy our relationship. I don't want to destroy the family. There's a lot of blame, especially when it comes to young people. A lot of blame on the child who is being sexually assaulted. So if you have an adult sexually assaulting the child, let's say that child is the stepdaughter of the assaulter. You have a lot of times the mother in this case will deny this ever happens, will somehow pass the blame on the child for being promiscuous. The child might even blame themselves, like, this is my fault. How could I have prevented this? I don't want to say anything because I don't want to destroy the relationship that my family has. So the bevy of excuses and rationale behind this is quite vast. And a lot of times it's very contingent on the person or the relationship that they have. The adults you see, a lot of times they may help the situation. They hinder the situation, and let's put it that way, in terms of not believing, not taking proactive actions. So a lot of this is very contingent on the situation and the person. Some people find out and that's it. They shut the whole situation down. They press charges, and others extend the situation. And they finally find out through word of mouth and through their kids being honest that possibly the stepfather hasn't just abused the mother, but they've abused the daughter as well as the other kids. So a lot of this is contingent on the situation, the parenting, and let's say the immigration status as well. That also affects how this is being reported and handled. To fear of the police and the judicial system. A lot of times those who are abused don't want to report it out of fear of getting the abuser jailed or arrested or possibly killed by police or by the system. There's a bevy of different reasons and rationale behind reporting or not reporting, depending on the particular situation that we find ourselves in.
Out of that 3% that you referenced earlier, do you find, or is there any like statistic that tells us that part of the reason why the other percentages sort of don't, go through to the end in the person being, charged and or, convicted? Is it because a lot of persons end up retracting, just kind of, I'm not going to do it. Never mind. No, I'm going to take the way pressing charges. Forget it. I'm not interested. Or that, hey, I don't want to have to deal with a court case. I don't want to have to put myself out there in that way. Do you find the reasons why are because we pull back and we don't follow through, or is it just the system is in need of being fixed just that badly?
Right. So the 3% is of only of those who press charges. These aren't even of all the cases. So not pressing charges is quite common. Some people just don't want to have anything to do with it. For example, when you have your sexual assault exam, when you go to the hospital for sexual assault, you have a 7-year hold. In terms of once the exam is done, you're allowed to hold it for 7 years and decide if you want to press charges within those 7 years. If you're
Now, is
below
that
the
just
age of,
in the state of New Jersey, or is it state by state that
it's
is?
a state by state law, right?
All right.
If you're under the age of 18 and you've been assaulted, you have 7 years from your 18th birthday to decide if you want to press charges. So that's one reason why people don't press charges. They're still trying to work through the trauma and go through their own process and determine if they want to press charges. The reason the number is so low for those who do press charges, it's quite difficult through the court of law to prove that a sexual assault has happened beyond a reasonable doubt. And a lot of the onus is going to be on the abused party to prove that this has happened. Like they have the burden of proof.
That's probably what makes it so hard for people to come forward, because it's it's just devastating. I mean, you hear even in marital relationships where persons have been raped, right? And we don't consider that to be the situation because, well, you're married. Yeah, but it's
Right.
my body. And if I say no, then it's no, right?
Right.
You don't get the right, you don't have the right to force yourself on anybody, no matter what, your status is, boyfriend, girlfriend, friend, um, LBGTQAI, all of that community.
Uh-huh.
I noticed that your organization taps into that community as well.
Right.
Tell me a little bit about that and how they are being served through your organization.
Our organization, we have a specific person, Ali. They do a great job with facilitating the organization's move into underrepresented communities. So the LGBTQIA plus, it's a long acronym,
Right.
but they're traditionally underrepresented in the fields of domestic assault and domestic violence and sexual assault. And so what we do now is do as much as we can to bring those voices to the forefront. We have someone, as I mentioned, Ali. They do a great job in terms of counseling this group of people and letting them know the services that are available, and just letting people know when you go into a hospital room and you see someone is in a homosexual or a non-heterosexual relationship, and that's the relationship in which they were sexually assaulted. It is nice to be able to let them know that at the agency we have someone who specializes in the LGBTQIA community and will know a little bit more in depth about your situation, as it is different. It is different than a heterosexual relationship and the assault or the domestic violence that happens within that relationship. So we do a lot of reaching out through community organizations, through fundraisers, through just having a presence in what we do.
So it sounds to me like one of the things, as I mentioned earlier about the CDC saying that sexual violence assault is preventable, it is in a way, like you also stated, where we have to teach people certain life skills, right? But they start right, at home. And so then that's a whole thing. We have to get parents on board. We have to get, them to approve this sort of training in schools. I don't know. Is that something you think, because I don't think that I've heard of it being in schools. Is that something you think would be valuable to a school district to implement this sort of training?
Implement training to assist,
to help with the life skills, like for what you do with healthy masculinity task force training, like, the things that you talk to them about. Do you think that that is something that a school district would benefit from? And has your organization ever thought about maybe putting together a curriculum to sort of get the word out even on a wider scale?
Right. So what we do right now is so 2 points. The healthy masculinity, that's very much something that we are striving to get into schools more and do, reaching out to the teachers, reaching out to different schools. And on the side of the LGBTQIA, as of, I believe, 2 weeks ago, we are very much starting to push into the school in that respect and kind of trying to combine the two and letting people know that it's more giving people a more full scope of domestic violence, sexual assault, healthy masculinity, how these social norms of gender, how this all plays into the larger scheme of allowing for sexual assault to kind of be accepted within society and not and more be kind of hush hush. Right. So we're trying to combine these different, the LGBTQIA, healthy masculinity, understanding what is sexual assault, understanding what is gender and social norms, and kind of putting this into a bundle and delivering to a school and say, this is something that we can help facilitate, something we can teach, a program that we can give you. And this hopefully will give kids a different perspective and maybe change the way they see the world, and change the way they see it through a heteronormative view, and more that this is all interconnected, and we have to address these things as they are to be able to come down to a conclusion in which we can help out.
So what age do you propose would be a good age to start it? I mean, because, I have a sister who is a parent. She teaches, excuse me, let me get her their title right. So she teaches for John Maxwell, right? Okay. She's a part of the faculty with the John Maxwell team, and she does their domestic and international training for parents. And so I think that is something that is definitely necessary, because we parents need training. Nobody teaches you the stuff that you need to learn to be a parent, to be honest with you. You sort of learn as you go. And then, I don't know if you have any children or anything, but I know that, like, for me, I'll speak for myself. Growing up, there were some things that, parents did, and certain rules and regulations that your parents had. You're like, when I have kids, I'm not ever doing that. It's just like, no, it's never going to happen. That's a lie. Because you end up having kids and like, oh, Lord, I'm sounding like my mama. But it's not a bad thing. For our particular situation, it's not a bad thing. It's not something that was done that harmed us, nothing that was egregious, nothing like that. So I know she often talks about having to educate parents. And she also has the daycare center, a child Christian academy for daycare age children. And the things that I know they're learning, I often say to myself, well, darn, is that a little too early for them? But I gather not, because they are retaining it. They are they're learning a whole lot that they don't normally learn just by being at home with a parent oftentimes. So I guess my question for this sexual piece, right? I know everything has to be age appropriate, but do you think, what do you think rather is the age where you want to start it off in a school district or a school system?
Oof. I can speak for us at DASAC. We seem to right now be around high school age in terms of understanding and having folks understand everything from kind of gender boxes to healthy masculinity, what it is to be a quote unquote man, what is manliness. There are programs that go younger. We at the agency don't go younger than that. Our cutoff for a lot of our services is the age of 13.
Okay.
So a lot of what we do is 13 and above. So we try to make sure to have it age appropriate. If we're going, say, freshman year, we try to very much make it age appropriate, understanding what is gender, understanding what it is to be a man. And a lot of it is just brainstorming. Like we would be able to say to a kid, whether in freshman year or last year of middle school, describe to me a bit about what are some of the stereotypes of to be an all-American guy. And so the kids will kind of list out what those stereotypes are. What are the stereotypes to be an all-American woman? And they'll list down those things. And then you kind of have to go into a bit deeper and say, when is it okay to have, for a guy to have these stereotypes? What is that called? Or for a man to have female stereotypes, let's put it that way.
Okay.
And what is that called? And then vice versa as well. And just kind of slowly working into a conversation that this can, having a man have female attributes or characteristics in a heteronormative sense can lead to name calling, can lead to, being bullied, can lead to fights. And same thing for a woman the other way. She can be named tomboy or whatever these pejorative terms are. So just to slowly start to introduce concepts and have them question and think about different concepts in a way that may not be, as you said, presented in the home or through a more traditional school environment.
So that said, though, then let me ask this question, because I touched on it slightly earlier. Want to know, how often do you find coming to you all men to say they've been abused?
Not often at all. I think of my time working, I'm trying to think if I've never had a male, I've never had to report to the hospital or deal with a male sexual assault victim. Wow. I know we have them. I've never had to deal with them, but they're quite rare. If we receive any, I believe we have had one or two men in non-heterosexual relationships. I'm not sure exactly the dynamic of their relationship, but I would say it's quite rare. It's very rare that, at least for me in my time here, I have never come across a victim of sexual assault who was a male.
Do you think rare because
rare because so many reasons. Yeah. Rare because it's societal norms. Like to be crass, how are you a man and be sexually assaulted by a woman? How are you a man and be sexually assaulted? Full stop. What does that look like? How are you going to explain that out? How are you going to go to court and say this woman has sexually assaulted me? There are a lot of stigmas around men being victims of sexual assault that I know prevent people from coming in, not only to the hospital, but seeking services from our organization or any other organization as well. I mean, I would argue that you'll be hard pressed to find a guy who's going to be, you know what, if I ever get sexually assaulted, I'm going to go and get these services. I think for women, it's just as hard, but I think there's another level of societal norms on top of that makes it a bit more counterintuitive to what quote unquote men do.
Right. Especially because as a woman, you're somewhat considered, the weaker species. Of course, a man can overpower you, of course,
Right.
But I just think that it's so unfortunate across the board, because it's difficult, like you said, for women as well. It's difficult, I'm sure it has to be for men. But we've got to find ways, right, to make it easier for people to be able to come to an organization like yours and to express themselves so that they can get help. Because if not, we just keep running the same circle of people having to then try to self-heal, right? Self-medicate. Then we turn to drugs, we turn to alcohol, we turn to cutting. These are some of the things that I've heard people and subsequently end up doing, because they feel as though they don't have anybody that they can talk to about it. Suicide rates are up. I mean, it's so unfortunate that we aren't caring for each other. I'm a Christian, and one of the things that I often and reminded of, right, is the commandments, the greatest of the two, right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength. That's the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like unto it, love your neighbor as yourself. It's just like on these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets, and everything should be, pretty okay. If we would just respect one another, if we could just care for one another, if we can really look at each other not as, as property and or things and or be disgusted by what we see, because that's part of the reason why those who are in the LGBTQ
yeah
plus community have often endured this type of pain because people are disgusted. Especially I hear so many stories about trans persons who persons have found out that they were trans, and it's just like now it's just on a whole nother scale, beating people to death. This kind of stuff has to stop. I just think it's our lack of compassion for our differences, right? Our lack of compassion for our own choices. Part of the thing that makes this country great for me, that has always been great, if you will, is that we have the freedom to choose. I mean, God himself gives us free will. It's just like, allow people to live their lives. And it's disheartening. It's a sad subject for me to talk about. I don't, I can't, I think, I don't know anybody. I've heard, I should say, I'm not gonna say I don't know anybody. I've heard persons who I am in relationship with talk about some of these stories and say how they have tried to communicate with family members, that family members have abused them and the family members don't believe them. And that's hard, but I am so excited that you and the organization that you're in connection with are doing the work that you do. I just wish it was just so many more of you out here doing that.
Yeah, so it's tough. It's tough because a lot of what we see and come back to are just norms. A lot of what we see come back to are a lack of caring, as you mentioned. And until we change that, until we change mentalities, until we move ourselves out of this normative state in which women are the lesser, men are the more, and everybody who falls into the category of LGBTQIA, especially Black trans women, until we see them as being our equals, I think this is going to continue to perpetuate itself. And as you mentioned, if we don't change this, it's going to continue to get worse. It's going to continue to get worse, and we're going to normalize seeing Black trans women be beaten to death once they come out to a person. But also on what you said before, if folks want to find out about our types of, let's say, folks who want to find out about organizations like ours, they can go to njcasa.com, and that has a list of organizations such as ours for each county in the state of New Jersey.
Repeat that website one more time.
It's NJCASA, so NJCASA, njcasa.org, I believe, ORG, if I'm not mistaken. And from there, you can find out the different sexual assault and domestic violence organizations within the state of New Jersey.
So tell me, what's on your agenda? What's next for you? Like I said, your resume is impressive. You're doing such great work. What's next for you? What's your focus now?
Right now, my focus is actually moving away from sexual assault and domestic violence and moving more towards collaborating with underrepresented groups. So that's actually my new focus coming into 2021. I'm going to be doing a lot more with the Spanish-speaking community as well as the African-American community to let them not to understand, but let them know the services that we have, how to reach these services, whether those services are counseling, whether those services are just understanding the options they have through the legal system, and very much bringing them into the fold that a lot of times is just designated to middle upper class white women. So we want to bring these underrepresented communities into this fold and let them know these are the resources that you have. A lot of these resources are free for you and your family.
Nice.
And so please use them, because we see a lot of residual trauma within these communities. And the hope is that bringing these resources to light, we can slowly start to chip away at this trauma that we see in a lot of our communities.
I commend you for that. I thank you for that. I'm looking forward to hearing more great things from you, and especially about that, because one of the things that just came to mind as we were having our conversation, and we're about to wrap it up, but one of the things that I wanted to say is that one of the things that has been historical for those of us African Americans is that even when we were slaves, right, it was the whole master raping the slaves and just kind of taking our bodies and doing what they wanted to with them. And it just sort of, it brings back that thing, that memory to me, and, you know, that this was kind of how we were treated. It's just,
Right.
you know, and so for it to be continued even now here in 2021, we're still dealing with those same issues and still not being believed and still having difficulty getting somebody to hear us. Because even I do know that a lot of times when African American women or women of color tend to, you know, vocalize or, you know, verbalize their grievance, they seem to become the victim all over again. And that's disheartening. So I hope that the work that you're doing and that others like you are doing will help us to get somewhere past that point. I'm hopeful normally. It's difficult though.
It is difficult. It is difficult. And we've had a long history in this country of continuously kind of being pushed to the side of a lot of the free services that are available. These aren't even paid services. So the hope is that we can bring ourselves into the fold and understand what these free services are, and understand that we don't have to be stigmatized by these services. They're available. They're confidential. It's not like people are going to go out and scream to the world that you're utilizing these services. So
Right.
just to kind of move that into the forefront of our minds, that say that these services are available. It shouldn't be shameful. It shouldn't be something that is shameful that you've been assaulted, because it's not your fault you've been
Right.
assaulted. It's someone else's fault that you've been assaulted.
Right.
So to kind of change the dynamic of this and let them know that these services are available. It's not your fault. It is confidential, and we can slowly, through counseling, kind of hopefully chip away at some of this trauma, so it's not perpetuated generation upon generation.
Yeah, and the availability of it is key, because I think
Exactly.
a lot of times that's not offered to us. We're not told about it. It's not in our community.
Exactly.
And so therefore, you know, that's the difficulty in feeling as though there's nobody, there's no voice, there's no one there to help you know, help me or people
Right.
like me. So I applaud you for that. I think that's awesome. And I'm grateful. So I thank you so much for your time today. It was very enlightening. I know somebody is listening that is definitely going to benefit from this. And even if it's not them, if they know somebody,
Exactly.
make sure that they refer them to this video and the information that we are sure to scroll immediately after our conversation, with all of the websites and the details and information that you have provided us with. But before I let you go, I know one thing for sure. Women watching now probably are wondering if a smart, handsome, bilingual, which you already mentioned, I forgot to say that, but bilingual, because it's not just Spanish. I understand you speak a little Dutch too.
Yeah, I speak Dutch as well, yeah.
Compassionate young man like you is single. I'm just going to call it out right now. I'm asking a question. I know they're going to ask it. So I'm going to let you have the floor, sir.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Well, I guess that's it. I'm not getting a direct answer. That I don't y'all call me. Don't ask me no more. That's the way it is. I thank you so much. And as I end every Inspired Purpose, I ask this one question, and I need you to fill in the blanks.
Okay.
I want you to say, I am Bremen, inspired by blank with a purpose for blank.
Oof. I'm Bremen, inspired by my ancestors for the purpose of improving not only our community, but the community at large.
Oh, yes, I believe that, sir. You are awesome. I am just so blessed to now be in the company of those who know you. And I appreciate this time. Thank you so much for everything you do.
I
God
appreciate it.
bless
Thank
you
you.
for your endeavors. It has not yet appeared the great things that you are going to do for this world. And I'm here for it.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for the time, the opportunity just to express, hopefully possibilities of people to get some help and assistance.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.